In the suburbs of a small Texas town, life looked ordinary on the surface. Rows of identical houses lined clean, quiet streets. Families gathered on porches in the evenings, children rode bikes until the sun went down, and neighbors waved to one another in passing. Among the familiar faces was Officer Daniel Crowley, a man everyone thought they knew. He had been on the police force for over a decade, earning a reputation as disciplined, reliable, and committed to keeping order. To the outside world, Daniel seemed like the definition of authority and responsibility. He wore his uniform with pride, carried himself with confidence, and maintained the kind of image people expected from a man of the law. But behind his carefully maintained exterior, Daniel's world was far from perfect. At home, his marriage to Caroline had been strained for years. Their relationship was built on routine and control rather than love or tenderness. Caroline had once believed in the man she married, but years of his temper, his cutting remarks, and his obsession with dominance had left her drained. Their neighbors only saw the polished surface, the man grilling in the backyard or standing tall at block parties, but Caroline lived with the cracks in his facade every day. Daniel's resentment towards life grew quietly inside him, like a sickness he never acknowledged. His views of the world had hardened into prejudice, and though he kept it buried in public, his private conversations revealed the bitterness and bigotry that guided his thinking. Just 2 houses away, another story was unfolding. Maya Johnson, only 22, had recently returned to the neighborhood after leaving her college dorm. She was studying nursing and working part-time at a local clinic to save money. Maya was everything Daniel was not, young, hopeful, and determined to create a future for herself. She carried a lightness that came from believing in possibilities, even if her family didn't have much. Her mother welcomed her back home, proud to have her daughter close again, and the Johnson house quickly became filled with life and energy. To those around her, Maya represented potential, a reminder of how bright the future could look when you still believed in it. For Daniel, however, Maya's presence became something far more complicated. He noticed her in ways that went beyond neighborly acknowledgement. He would linger when she passed by, let his gaze follow her longer than it should, and think about her during moments when he should have been focused elsewhere. At first, these thoughts came like whispers, easy to ignore. But as the weeks went on, the whispers grew louder. Daniel's boredom, his resentment at home, and his unspoken prejudice began twisting together into an unhealthy obsession. Maya, unaware of the storm brewing just a few doors away, continued living her life. She studied late into the night, laughed with friends on the phone, and dreamed about finishing her degree. The suburban street that looked so safe and familiar was, in truth, holding the seeds of tragedy. What seemed like an ordinary neighborhood with neatly trimmed lawns and smiling neighbors was about to become the setting for a dark story that no one could have predicted. Daniel's interest in Maya grew quickly, and soon it stopped being something he could hide behind polite gestures. He used his position as a police officer to present himself as helpful and trustworthy. At first, it was small things, offering to keep an eye on her house when her mother was away, checking in when she came home late from work, or giving her advice about staying safe in the neighborhood. To an outsider, these gestures might have seemed harmless, even protective, but beneath them was something more calculated. Daniel wasn't simply being a good neighbor. He was testing boundaries, watching how much space Maya would allow him in her life. Maya had always been taught to respect authority, and Daniel's role as a cop made it difficult for her to push back. When he insisted on driving her home one evening, after noticing her walking from the bus stop, she reluctantly agreed. She told herself it was nothing unusual, but there was something unsettling in his tone, something that suggested his kindness wasn't entirely selfless. Still, Maya kept her worries quiet. In a community where Daniel was respected and admired, speaking out against him would be almost unthinkable. Over time, his presence in her life grew. He would stop by under the excuse of checking in, asking if she needed anything. He lingered when they talked, his eyes holding hers a moment too long. Maya felt uneasy, yet part of her was caught in the strange attention he gave her. Daniel was older, experienced, and intimidating in ways she couldn't quite explain. Their interactions became less about neighborly concern and more about secrecy. One evening, after months of tension, the line between them blurred completely. Daniel pushed the boundary further than ever before, and Maya, trapped between fear of him and fear of what might happen if she refused, didn't resist. What followed was a relationship defined by secrecy and control. Daniel had power not only as a man twice her age, but also as a police officer with influence in the community. He made sure Maya understood the consequences of speaking out, warning her in subtle, threatening ways. To the outside world, Daniel was still the reliable cop and family man. But in the shadows, he had bound Maya to him in a web of silence. Neighbors occasionally noticed Daniel's car parked near Maya's house at odd hours. But when asked, he would explain it away as part of his patrol duties. Nobody questioned him further. His reputation and authority shielded him from suspicion. For Maya, each passing week made it harder to escape. What had started as uneasy encounters had become an affair she could not control, one marked by secrecy, shame, and manipulation. The relationship was not built on love, but on Daniel's hunger for dominance and Maya's inability to find a way out. She carried the weight of it silently, while he continued to live his double life, smiling for the neighbors by day and sinking deeper into obsession by night. The walls of their quiet suburban street kept the secret contained, but every secret has a breaking point, and theirs was getting closer with each passing day. Caroline Crowley had lived with Daniel for more than a decade, and in that time she had learned to read him in ways no one else could. His uniform, his medals, and his posture may have convinced the neighborhood that he was steady and respectable, but Caroline knew the shifts in his tone, the tightening of his jaw, the way he deflected when confronted. She had given up trying to fight him years earlier, resigning herself to silence whenever he grew distant or angry. But silence does not erase suspicion, and when Daniel's patterns began to change, Caroline noticed immediately. He had always been controlling with his time, strict about routine and predictable to a fault. Suddenly, though, there were late-night calls he couldn't fully explain, long showers after coming home, and a new restlessness in his manner. Caroline at first brushed it aside, telling herself it was the stress of his job. Yet the unease grew each time he slipped out after dinner, muttering about needing to check on something. She would lie awake in their bed, staring at the empty space beside her, wondering where he really was. The truth revealed itself one afternoon in the simplest of ways. Caroline had been sorting laundry when Daniel's phone, left carelessly on the counter, buzzed with a notification. She wasn't the kind of woman who went through her husband's things, but something about the sound drew her attention. The message was a voicemail, and when she tapped to listen, she froze. The voice was unmistakably young, soft, and unfamiliar, Maya Johnson's voice, their neighbor from down the street. Caroline listened again, her hands trembling. The words were not explicit, but the tone carried intimacy that could not be explained away. Rage rose in her like fire. For years she had endured Daniel's coldness, his sharp words, and the weight of his prejudice. Now she realized he had been sneaking into another life altogether, a life that humiliated her in the cruelest way. Confrontation was inevitable. That night she demanded an explanation. Daniel dismissed her suspicions with the same arrogance he had always carried, denying, deflecting, twisting her words until she questioned herself. But Caroline knew what she had heard, and for the first time she refused to let it go. Still, Daniel was a man who thrived on control, and his reaction only deepened the cracks between them. He began to guard his phone, to leave the house at stranger hours, to shut her out completely. Caroline was left with her thoughts, replaying the voicemail in her head, envisioning her husband in the arms of their young neighbor. Shame mixed with fury, and the weight of betrayal settled on her shoulders. She had sacrificed so much for this marriage, her youth, her freedom, her peace, and now he had humiliated her with someone half her age, someone who lived only a few steps away. In the quiet of their home, Caroline's anger hardened into resolve. She stopped asking questions. She stopped confronting. Outwardly, she carried on with her routines, but inside, she was planning. What Daniel failed to see was that a woman pushed to the edge does not always break. Sometimes she prepares to strike back. The storm was no longer just his to control. Something darker was taking root, and it was only a matter of time before it consumed them all. The night that would change everything began like so many others. The air was thick with summer humidity, the kind that clung to skin and carried a sense of unease. Daniel told Caroline he was heading out on patrol, a claim she had long since stopped questioning aloud. But this time she did not stay behind in silence. Instead, she waited for him to leave, then followed, her hands gripping the wheel of her car so tightly that her knuckles turned pale. She had memorized his patterns, the places he drifted toward when he thought no one was watching. Tonight, She was determined to see the truth with her own eyes. Daniel pulled into the driveway of the Johnson home, the house he had visited countless times under the guise of neighborly concern. Caroline parked a distance away, her heart pounding as she watched him step out of his vehicle. He carried himself with confidence, as though this meeting was nothing unusual, as though he were entitled to slip into another life whenever it pleased him. Caroline's stomach turned, the betrayal burning hotter than ever. In her purse, she carried the weight of his service pistol, a weapon she had taken from their bedroom earlier in the evening. At first, she had grabbed it in a haze of anger, unsure what she meant to do with it. But now, as she watched him disappear inside the house, it felt less like an accident and more like fate. Inside, Maya had been waiting. She looked uneasy, her arms folded tightly across her chest. What had once been secrecy mixed with curiosity had now soured into dread. She wanted out, wanted distance from the man who had come to dominate her life. When Daniel entered, she told him as much. The words were careful but firm, a plea for freedom. Daniel's face hardened. He wasn't used to losing control, and the thought of Maya slipping away ignited a rage he tried to mask with calm authority. Before either of them could resolve the rising tension, Caroline entered the room. Her footsteps echoed like thunder, the pistol clutched in her trembling hands. For a brief moment, the world seemed to freeze. Daniel's eyes widened, caught between shock and fury, while Maya's breath caught in her throat. Caroline's voice did not rise. It was her silence that screamed the loudest. She had seen enough, lived enough, endured enough. The betrayal was no longer something hidden in whispers or glances. It stood in front of her, undeniable, and it carried the face of her husband and their young neighbor. The moment cracked under pressure. Daniel moved forward, hands out, his words sharp and commanding as though he could still control the scene. But Caroline was no longer under his influence. Her hands shook, her mind replaying every insult, every lie, every night spent alone in suspicion. Then came the sound that shattered the silence, a single shot, loud and final. Maya collapsed, her future stolen in an instant. The neighbors heard the noise and dialed emergency services, their voices frantic and confused. By the time help arrived, the room was chaos. Maya lay motionless. Caroline stood pale and stunned, and Daniel tried desperately to twist the narrative, insisting it was a break-in, a tragic mistake. But the truth lingered in the air, heavy and undeniable. The facade of control had shattered, leaving only ruin behind. The aftermath of that night unfolded slowly, like a wound that refused to close. Sirens pierced the quiet suburban streets, their flashing lights reflecting off the tidy houses that had once felt safe. Neighbors gathered in clusters on lawns, whispering and speculating as police cars filled the cul-de-sac. Inside the Johnson home, chaos reigned. Officers found Maya's body on the floor, a young life cut short before it could fully begin. Caroline stood nearby, her face blank, her hands trembling as if the gunshot still echoed through her bones. Daniel, in his uniform pants and civilian shirt, barked instructions, trying to control the narrative even as the evidence began to stack against him. He insisted there had been an intruder. He claimed he and his wife had walked in at the wrong time, that the situation spiraled into tragedy. But as detectives arrived, details refused to match his story. There were no signs of forced entry, no struggle to suggest a stranger's presence. The pistol used in the shooting was registered to Daniel, his own service weapon. Caroline was taken into custody for questioning, her hands cuffed, her face pale but oddly calm, as if she had expected this outcome all along. In the days that followed, investigators combed through phone records, messages, and surveillance footage. What they uncovered dismantled Daniel's carefully constructed image piece by piece. Texts and voicemails revealed the affair between him and Maya, messages filled with secrecy and pressure that painted a clear picture of manipulation. Neighbors who had seen his car parked outside at odd hours came forward, no longer afraid to speak. Caroline's discovery of the voicemail provided a timeline, linking her growing suspicion to the night of the shooting. Caroline's confession came reluctantly but truthfully. She admitted to following Daniel that night, admitted to taking the gun, and admitted to pulling the trigger in a moment where years of rage and betrayal boiled over. Prosecutors prepared charges of second-degree murder, arguing that though she had not planned Maya's death in detail, she had carried the weapon knowing what might unfold. Her trial drew attention across the state. not only for the shocking nature of the crime, but also for the revelations about Daniel's abuse of power. Daniel was not spared by the investigation. Though he did not face murder charges, his reputation was destroyed. Internal affairs uncovered patterns of misconduct, complaints buried under his years of service, and a troubling history of racial bias in his policing. Once seen as a man who represented authority, he became the symbol of corruption, prejudice, and hypocrisy. He was forced to resign in disgrace, stripped of his badge and pension, his name forever tied to scandal. For Maya's family, justice felt hollow. Their daughter's dream of becoming a nurse had ended violently, her future erased by the selfish actions of two adults who should have known better. Her mother wept at the trial, holding pictures of Maya in her graduation gown, her smile radiant with the promise of what could have been. The community that had once believed in the safety of their neighborhood now lived with the memory of flashing lights, police tape, and betrayal that reached into every corner of their lives. Caroline was sentenced to decades in prison, where she would spend the rest of her life replaying the choices that brought her there. Daniel walked free, but his fall was in many ways just as devastating. The man who once carried himself with pride was left isolated, stripped of the power he had used to control others. He became a cautionary tale, proof that even those who appear untouchable can be undone by the very secrets they try hardest to hide. Maya's name lived on, spoken in whispers at memorials and vigils, a reminder of innocence caught in the crossfire of obsession, betrayal, and prejudice. What began as a hidden affair ended as a tragedy that exposed the darkest truths lurking beneath the polished surface of suburban life.